What do you think about beans? Are you for them or against them? Well, nearly every nutritionist would assure you that beans are a very healthy food, and they are. But for diabetics, beans have enough carbohydrates to make us a little bit uneasy. In the following test, I'm going to put what I consider a good bean up against, well, not a bad bean, but a bean that's significantly inferior in its carbs and fiber content. My mother, who's no longer with us, grew to young adulthood during the tough times we know historically as the Great Depression, the 1930s. During that difficult time of little money, she told us that for her family, their go-to meal was simply bread and beans. Sometimes it was cornbread and beans, sometimes just plain bread and beans. But bread was cheap and beans were cheap and the meals were filling, so that became the standard fare at her household. Any diabetic who does much research knows that bread can be a nightmare for our blood sugar levels. It turns into sugar so incredibly fast, it's not much different from ingesting pure table sugar. Beans aren't nearly as bad, but they have enough carbs so that they can be problematic. Thus, a meal of bread and beans is one that most diabetics should avoid. But the exciting thing is that with all the knowledge of fiber and the various substitutes that are available today, it's possible to eat meals that previously would be on the forbidden list, without guilt and without a significant rise in blood sugar. I went to the store the other day and bought what I considered the best and the worst beans I could find in the area of carbs and fiber. For beans, as well as for any other food you may be comparing, the rule is very simple. The lower the carbs, the better, and the higher the fiber, the better. So I checked out all the beans in the store to find the ones with the lowest carbs and the highest carbs, and with the lowest fiber and the highest fiber. What I ended up choosing were these. The small red beans had 23 grams of carbs for a quarter cup, but 16 of those grams were fiber carbs. So their net carbs were 7 grams for a quarter cup serving. These were the best. For the worst, I chose yellow beans, which had 34 grams of carbs for a quarter cup, and only 8 of those grams were fiber. This gave these beans 26 net grams of carbs for a quarter cup serving. This means that the yellow beans were 3 times more likely to raise blood sugar than the small red beans. For this meal, I'm going to eat one of my mom's old standby meals, and one that she made for my sister and I even in the 60s when the Great Depression was long over. I'm going to eat 2 slices of bread with small red beans on them, and then I'll come back another day and eat 2 slices of the same bread with the yellow beans on them, and we'll see if the yellow beans really do raise blood sugar much more than the small red beans with their high fiber content and lower carbs. The bread I'll be eating is a fairly low-carb bread, and it has only 7 net grams of carbs per slice. I'll be back an hour after my meal. I'll let you know how I came out. Started out at 100. We'll see how much these particular beans, and these are the small red beans, how much they raise my blood sugar. I don't think they'll raise it much. Limit is 140. I don't like to ever go over 140, except maybe for an experiment. So let's see what we get here. And here we go, 5 seconds, 151. Well, that's a bit high, higher than I expected it would be. And I'm just wondering if the small red beans and rice on these 2 slices of bread does this much. What are those yellow beans tomorrow going to do to affect my blood sugar? We'll see. Stay tuned. I was surprised when I tested my blood sugar at the 1-hour mark after eating the yellow beans the next day, and the monitor read 124. With their lower fiber and higher carbs than the small red beans, this was not supposed to happen. Wow, that was interesting. I was quite sure the small red beans with their lesser carbs and higher fiber would raise my blood sugar less than the yellow beans, but it didn't happen. What's the deal? The simple answer is I don't know. There are always going to be some mysteries when you do a lot of blood sugar tests. Sometimes I think my pancreas has its off days when it just doesn't work as well as at other times. I ended up doing several more tests on the beans, and this is what I discovered. After doing several more tests with the red and yellow beans on 2 slices of bread, and then averaging my blood sugar peaks at the 1.5-hour mark after the meals, The red beans with their much higher fiber did average lower than the yellow beans. The red beans plus bread raised my blood sugar to an average score of 128, and the yellow beans created an average of 142. So in the end, high fiber did prove superior to lesser fiber. Still, the blood sugar scores were not that consistent as those first two tests proved. Beans are simply not as consistent in the blood sugar rise that they provoke, which makes it more difficult to predict exactly what they're going to do to you. These tests served as kind of a reality check for me in my early days after I figured out the relationship between carbohydrates and blood sugar rise. I swore off beans altogether. The final straw for me was when I had a large bowl of mixed bean soup and found my blood sugar had risen to, I think it was a little over 150 after an hour. But as I did more tests, I discovered that I could have a medium bowl of some of the higher fiber beans, like lentils, and my blood sugar would behave itself and not go near my limit of 140. These beans on bread tests were the first time in over 15 years I tried this combination, and my results were surprising to me. I was really expecting those red beans to treat my blood sugar kindlier, with those 16 grams of fiber per quarter cup serving, and only 8 non-fiber carbs in that serving. As I thought about it and analyzed it, I realized now just where I made my mistake. I got so excited about the fiber, I forgot just how small a 1/4 cup serving actually is. It is tiny. This is a 1/4 cup measure, and the amount of beans I was putting on my bread involved quite a number of these 1/4 cup servings. That first high score with the red beans was a real shock to me, but as I think about it, I shouldn't have been shocked at all. These tests reveal a very powerful truth, which is that ultimately our blood sugar monitor must be our guide. Regardless of how many claims a food product may proudly write on their package, what really matters to those of us with blood sugar issues is, what number do we see on our monitors when we check our blood sugar levels an hour to an hour and a half after eating? If the number is too high, we either forget that meal or we modify it until it yields a much better number. If it's in the safe range, we add it to our repertoire of acceptable meals. Recapping these last 4 tests, here's what my monitor revealed. With the yellow beans, my pre-meal test averaged 102. At 1 hour, my blood sugar averaged 135, and after 1.5 hours, my average was 143. With the red beans, my pre-meal test averaged 105, my 1-hour test averaged 140, and my 1.5-hour test averaged 129. My takeaway from these tests is that beans on bread is simply too taxing of a meal for my blood sugar. I'll still eat beans, but not with bread. And I'll keep testing myself just to keep track of exactly what they're doing to my blood sugar. If nothing else, these tests demonstrate that beans, with all their protein and fiber, are still an iffy food for diabetics, and they need to be eaten carefully and in moderate portions. I just wasn't satisfied to leave things at that, so I came up with yet another way to have beans and bread and gave it one more try. This time I achieved complete success, and my blood sugar monitor confirmed it. After getting these blood sugar numbers, I felt like saying, "Hallelujah, I have found it. At last I found a way, a safe way to eat beans on bread and still get great blood sugar levels." This series of tests involving beans and bread make an important point, and it has to do with the concepts of testing, experimenting, and making modifications. I wanted desperately to be able to eat beans on bread just like my mother used to make. At first, I thought the red beans, with their high fiber count and the relatively low-carb bread that I was using, which was Nature's Own double fiber, would do the job. But this didn't work for me, neither with the yellow beans or the red beans. Finally, I thought of another way, to use a low-carb recipe for making muffins and create a bread in a plastic bowl. Using Carb-Quick, ground flaxseed and coconut flour, an egg and a few other ingredients, I made my bread. Then I used slightly less beans than I'd been using in the previous tests. I ate my beans on bread, waited an hour, tested, waited 30 minutes more, and tested again. Both the 1 hour and the 1.5 hour test gave me great numbers. Before the meal, my blood sugar was at 97, and it was still at 97 at the 1-hour post-meal mark. An hour and a half after the meal, it had drifted up to 104, which is no problem at all. Using less beans and a lower carb bread did the trick. I found a meal I can enjoy again and again without worrying about high blood sugar levels. This is a sort of a symbol for what diabetics and pre-diabetics need to do with all kinds of foods and all kinds of meals. Keep testing, keep experimenting, keep modifying until you get the numbers that you know are safe. And once you find a meal that works for you, tuck that meal away in your memory banks and start looking for other meals. In time, you'll be able to enjoy many, many different meals and foods, and you'll have the wonderful thought, I've got this, I can do this, and I don't even have to sacrifice all that much. Life is good.